Hi, Tony DeWitt here, Missouri appellate attorney and a guy who likes to make the law make sense on YouTube. Today we're going to talk about trespass and trespassing and trespassers who trespass, because some folks never learn. Let's go down to the beach and talk about this. When you own or rent a piece of land or property, or a building or a structure or an apartment, when you have a piece of property that you control, you have, among the many rights that you have, the ability to exclude others from that property. That is part of what lawyers call your bundle of sticks. When you get a piece of property, you get a bundle of sticks. You're entitled to use that property, generally speaking, as you see fit, as long as your use doesn't hurt someone else. And that's important because the notion of trespass derives from this idea that you have the ability to exclude other people from your property. Now, interestingly enough, the doctrine of trespass does not make any distinction between government entities that own land and private entities that own land. So what exactly is trespass? It is an intentional interference with the possessory interest in land. That's how it's described. Basically, what it means is when someone tells you to leave their property, you have to do it. It's pretty simple. It's not rocket science. It just means that people have a right to the private, quiet enjoyment of their property. Who has a possessory interest in land or property? Well, it can be the owner of that property, or it can be a tenant in that property. If I go in and decide that I want to rent an apartment, and I want to rent an apartment on the third floor, I can't control who goes into apartments on the first and second floor, but I can control, based on my lease, who comes into my apartment on the third floor. The owner, however, can control who goes in to any part of his property. Any person who enters land without permission is a trespasser. This, of course, raises the question of, what about the UPS driver? What about the mail person? What about the individual who comes to collect for charities? Well, each of those would be considered a little bit differently. The UPS driver, because you have selected to have a package delivered to you, has sort of an implied license to come, walk onto your property, deliver the product, and leave. He doesn't have the license by virtue of working for UPS to come and camp out on your front porch. But he does have the license to come and drop off the package. That is an implied permission. Same thing with the mail person. They have the ability to come onto your property and do that. Now, you can revoke that license. You can tell UPS, you can't come on my property. But if you do that, when you get something from Amazon that is shipped by UPS, you're going to have to go down to the UPS place to pick it up. The same thing with the mail people. You're going to have to go down to the post office to pick up your mail. Nobody really wants to do that. So the implied license to come onto the property is available to people of that nature. Now, the person collecting for charity, the salesperson who wants to show you a new vacuum cleaner, those people do not have an implied license. Now, they can certainly come up and knock on your door, but you have the right to tell them that they're trespassing and they need to leave. And if they don't leave, you have the right to tell them that you're going to call the cops. And if they don't leave, you call the cops. It's as simple as that. People who come onto your property have to get permission from you to be there. Most of the time, this is not a formal process. When my neighbor comes over to bring me cinnamon rolls, or when I go over to his house to take his trash can to the curb for him, I do not need his explicit permission because we've worked that out. Through both custom and usage, we know that we can momentarily go over onto the other person's property and do nice things for them. Nobody really objects to that. Now, if I started spray painting his property for him in a chartreuse color, he might definitely think I was trespassing. But fortunately, I'm colorblind, so I wouldn't even know what color to pick. Here's an interesting question. Are police officers trespassers? Well, police officers are trespassers unless they have a reason to be there based on a real and exigent need. This goes more into the Fourth Amendment jurisprudence, and I could talk for 2 to 3 hours about all of the different Fourth Amendment jurisprudence and what is the house, what is the curtilage of the property, all of these things. Those are all very important concepts in search and seizure law. But in terms of trespass, an officer is only trespassing if he's not on official business and doesn't have an actual reason or a legitimate reason to be there. So if the police come and knock on your door and they say you have a search warrant, you can't say, hey, you're trespassing, because the warrant is a governmental permission slip to go in there and do what needs to be done. Same thing with an arrest warrant. An arrest warrant is a license to go into property and remove someone because they're wanted for a crime. Usually the intrusion into the possessory interest of property has to be physical. You have to be physically present on the property. So somebody who is standing on the public sidewalk and is on the easement that is granted for the public sidewalk is not trespassing. But the moment they step onto the property, they are trespassing because that is a physical incursion into the property. There are a number of videos out there. Team Skeptic has a couple of what I would call the anti-mask Karens. They, during the pandemic, they would go in and loudly announce that they weren't wearing no stinking mask and that they still wanted to be served anyway. And many businesses, to protect not only their employees, but also to comply with state law in many instances, would refuse them service. And then these anti-mask Karens would stomp, throw their feet, and pitch a big old fit. What my Aunt Naomi used to call having a conniption fit. They'd have a conniption fit because they weren't getting served, and this place didn't have a right to make a law. It is amazing what people believe, and so much of it is just simply wrong. If you go into a business and you say, I want to buy, a bagel, and the owner says, well, you have to put on a mask to get a bagel, and you don't put on a mask, you're not going to get a bagel. And if you continue to pitch fit about it and he tells you to leave, you're going to have to leave. And if you don't leave, then you're probably going to wind up seeing the police officers. One of the things that I have seen a lot, particularly in these videos, a lot of the First Amendment auditor videos, a lot of the sovereign citizen videos of one variety or another, all say something to the effect of, well, police can't solicit a trespass. Well, I'm not really sure what that means. If I call the police and say, hey, I've got a salesman from World Book Encyclopedia on my front porch and he won't leave till I buy a 20-volume set, and I'm not really interested in an encyclopedia, it's the 21st century, I can get anything I need off Wikipedia. Well, the solution is for the police to come and remove them. When the police show up and they ask me, what do you want to do? My answer is going to be, I want him off my property. And that is not soliciting a trespass when the police ask you what you want to do. Now, if they go in and they say, hey, we could really cause some trouble for this guy if you tell us to trespass him, that's a little different story, but in most cases, even that is going to be okay. The officer might have to answer for it under internal affairs or something, but it probably is not going to invalidate the arrest for trespass, because that person is intruding into personal property, or actually into real property, and they are refusing a request to leave, and they're refusing the order from the police to leave. So how does a trespass arrest work? First of all, the owner says, you need to leave. the person who is going to be arrested says, I am not going to leave. So the owner or the manager of the property calls the police. The police come and say, I'm going to ask you to leave. You've been asked to leave. You need to leave. And they say, no, I am not going to leave. At that point, the police officer usually will bargain with them. Look, we can talk about this outside. You just can't do this. They'll tell them what their rights are. They'll tell them what their rights are not. And if none of that works and they can't de-escalate the person, then normally what will happen is they will arrest them and take them away and charge them with trespass. So the other way this happens, the other way people get arrested, but not for trespass, is when the police show up and say, you need to leave. They want you off the property. So the person leaves and the cop says, oh, hold on a minute. I need your name and address because I have to fill out a form and issue you a trespass warning. And the warning is a legal notice that says, look, if you come back onto this property, you are going to be arrested. It is, in fact, a service by the police officer to let you know that you've been trespassed from the property. A lot of times people who shoplift at Walmart are not prosecuted by the city. They are issued a trespass warning and told never to come back into that Walmart again, which in most cases is a much greater punishment in some of these small towns than is being sent to the county jail for 5 days where you get better food than you get at home. When the police officer takes the person outside and says, I need your name and address, and they refuse, you have to remember that trespass is a crime. Usually it's a misdemeanor, unless it's armed trespass, and that's an entirely different subject. But normally it's a crime, it's a misdemeanor. So under Terry versus Ohio, they have a right to pat you down and also to request your identification. And if you don't give them your identification, you're going to likely be detained and probably arrested for obstruction. Now, you might not be prosecuted for obstruction, but you'll be arrested for obstruction or suspicion of obstruction. You'll be taken to the city. You'll be fingerprinted. They will run your fingerprints through APHIS, and they will determine who you are. And in that manner, when they search you, they're going to find your driver's license or any identifying papers, and if necessary, they're going to tow your car, which is going to have a license information on it. All of these things are ways that they will eventually get your address and they'll issue you a trespass warning, and they might wind up letting you out of jail after you've cooled your heels for about 8 hours because, paperwork takes a long time when you have irritated the police. Now, one of the other ridiculous defenses that I hear from time to time on these First Amendment auditor videos is, well, this place is open to the public, and because it's open to the public, I can't be made to leave. That's absolutely wrong. All businesses, for the most part, are open to the public. I suppose there are a few automobile auction houses that are not, but generally speaking, most property is open to the public. And by virtue of being open to the public, people have a limited license to come in and stay on the property to conduct their business. But the minute you stop conducting business or the minute you create a problem, the owner or manager, the person in control of that property, can send you packing. And if you don't go, you are subject to trespass. As I mentioned, trespass is normally a misdemeanor. You can elevate it above misdemeanor if you engage in an assault or do other things. But generally speaking, it's a misdemeanor and fairly petty. You might wind up getting a fine. In many cases, I guess the number of clicks on YouTube results in a net profit for some of these bozos. But the bottom line is it's not a huge criminal offense to be trespassed. There is an exception to that, and that is the concealed carrier. In most states, when you have a concealed carry permit, if you are asked to leave the property because you are carrying concealed, you need to do it. You do not want them to call the police and have the police trespass you. because that elevates it to armed trespass. And in some jurisdictions, armed trespass can be a felony. And that is always a bad proposition for someone who is engaging in trespass to be an armed trespasser. So that's worth thinking about. As a concealed carrier myself, if somebody doesn't want me on my property with a firearm, I'm probably just not going to do business with them. I'm not going to waste my time challenging their authority to exclude me from their property, because I know as an attorney that they have that right and they can execute that right. And it would be stupid of me to persist in that endeavor and wind up getting arrested. So, to sum all of this up, trespass is an intentional intrusion onto the property of another. You can be asked to leave, and if you leave, you're not going to get cited for trespass. If you don't leave and the police are called, you're probably going to get a trespass warning at the very least. And if you don't leave when you're asked to, you are more likely than not going to get arrested for trespass. Now, recently, I have had some comments on one of my videos about how you can't be arrested for filming in public. That is technically true. The act of filming is not a crime. Photography is not a crime. Videography is not a crime. You can video, as long as you're not in a place where a person has a reasonable expectation of privacy. For example, the bathroom. All of that said, when someone tells you that you don't have permission to film and asks you to leave, you are not going to be arrested for the filming. You're going to be arrested for the trespass. And that is a common law doctrine that originated well before the founding of this country in England, and it has been carried over into this country. It's a good rule. It protects our right to exclude other people from our property. And I think most of us understand that trespass is something to be avoided. Apparently, the only people who don't understand that make First Amendment auditor videos, and that in and of itself is another story. So, hopefully, if you have any questions, please leave them in the comments down below. Otherwise, thank you so much for watching. Have a marvelous day, and don't forget to be kind. Catch you on here next time. If you like this video, here are a few others you might try, and don't forget to subscribe. Have a terrific day, guys.